Alice Oseman, creative genius, artist, writer, racist? Hi Pinkies, so Attitude magazine just named Alice Oseman the person of the year. I made a post about this on Twitter and I looked up to see if anybody else had made any comments about it or is talking about it at all. The first search result under Alice Oseman is Alice Oseman racist? So obviously I follow this rabbit trail, and I find this thread of people talking about how Alice Oseman had made comments saying that Heartstopper is more wholesome than
Yaoi.
gay manga. Now, even if that were true, I don't know that that is racist, but let's follow this rabbit trail further. You know what's something that Twitter really excels at? Citing their sources. It took me quite a bit of digging to find the original quotes from Alice that everyone was referencing. Here's the quote from Alice Oseman herself. BL manga / yaoi, as you probably know it, is generally incredibly explicit and often riddled with very nasty toxic tropes, so it's not really my sort of thing. But one artist who defies all these things is Hayakawa Nojiko. Much like Heartstopper, they're all realistic contemporary stories, and they all look at really complex feelings and relationships that are actually respectful and not explicit. But what I love most about them is the style. Hayakawa uses panels and framing almost exclusively to portray the mood and the tone of the scene. I'd cite them as my main inspiration for the way I use panels and structuring pages in Heartstopper. My favorite is Kuriyami ni Strobe. The other quote people cite is, "Yep, no explicit sex in this comic. The characters are teenagers, so it's just not appropriate. And even if they weren't, I'd have no interest in drawing that. I wouldn't describe this comic as yaoi or even BL. They're genres of comic that tend to fetishize and eroticize queer men in a really bad way. This comic is a romance between two boys in a coming-of-age story." If you're coming here from Twitter, I'd like to introduce you to a new concept. I know usually when you're introduced to something new, you want to call it racist or phobic, but in this case, it's called genre critique. Much like literary critique, genre critique can criticize an entire genre of literature or storytelling by using a few different examples from that genre. For example, some people might not like horror stories and would want to say horror is gross. Some people might think sci-fi is boring. Myself, I tend to think that murder mystery stories are sort of that exists almost only to gratify the ego of the writer. In this case, I'm not a very avid reader of manga, but I am a pretty avid watcher of anime. Let's take a look at 3 of my favorites. Stranger by the Shore, or Yumibe no Itranger, is a story about 2 different boys, one named Shun and one named Mio. The 2 connect when they're children. The story follows later on in life when Mio comes back to meet Shun again. Things have changed, life has gotten in the way. Mio is in a more or less arranged marriage with another woman. The subject matter of this story is far off from Heartstopper, and it does have one explicit sex scene between the 2, but Stranger by the Shore is by all means more explicit and more mature than Heartstopper, but the subject matter is different. Instead, let's take a look at something completely different. Dokyusei, or Classmates in English, is a coming-of-age story with 2 different boys. They fall in love with each other for the first time. One of them already knew he was gay, the other one did not know, and they have a really loving, tender relationship, but I would say that compared to Heartstopper, again, they are eroticized, they are sexualized, it's different. This one does not have an explicit gay sex scene, but what it does have is long making out scenes and talk of sex. You may not see this as explicit, erotic, or sexualization, but if you look at anime as a whole, oftentimes romances don't go this way. I'm currently rewatching Clannad, I think it's pronounced. I don't even want to try. Anyways, it's a high school romance between a boy and a girl, and they don't even kiss throughout the entire thing. They end up, spoilers, but they get married by the end of it, and they actually have a kid. There's no kissing or hugging or any of that throughout the whole thing. Again, in comparison, Dokyusei has explicit making out scenes. You could say this is just what they were able to get away with the Japanese censorship. So let's look at my final example, Neon Genesis Evangelion. Evangelion, I think, is the best and most respectful relationship that we can look at in these 3. If we really look at it, the relationship is between Shinji and Kaoru. Their relationship takes place at the very end of the story, and I would say, again, they're sexualized. The 2 talk 3 or 4 times throughout the show, but their main interactions take place in 2 places. 1, when they're both laying down in their own respective beds, and 2, in a shower scene where they end up holding hands. You could again argue this is not sexualization, especially by Evangelion standards, but again, I would say this is far more sexualized than anything that is done in the Heartstopper novel. So back to Twitter then. Do Alice Oseman's comments in some way implicate her as racist? No. And their only criticism, which I guess I would agree is at least a broad stroke, they literally cite a good example. So what would make someone do this? Why would somebody take Alice Oseman's very mundane comments about the genre of yaoi and somehow try and spin it to make them seem racist. I'm not sure. I don't really understand it. Maybe it's clout chasing, maybe... I really don't know. The main thing I would take away from this is that Alice Oseman is this figure who started off doing webcomics and online free novels. Twitter should be championing them as the George Lucas of our time. Truly a creative mind who respects and understands what kind of stories the youth of today need. Please don't go out of your way to try and take someone like Alice Oseman and throw the word racist next to their name. We already have enough British writers who have turned into this. We don't need to fake one. At the end of the day, Oseman's critique of yaoi as a genre is really interesting. When I first started seeking out yaoi films and anime, I found it really hard to find anything that was not explicitly just pornography. I guess these people on Twitter somehow want to keep these relationships that are sort of tailored towards straight women to be still intact. They want to keep consuming this media that's tailor-made for them. Perhaps it even makes financial sense for yaoi creators to tailor their things to straight women instead of actual gay people. But is this the right moral answer? I don't think so. Like the blaxploitation films of the 80s and 90s, yeah, some people may enjoy them. I think Steel is a fun watch.
It's on now.
But I don't think more genuine and wholesome forms of entertainment should be held back by the old status quo. Another thing to remember is that Oseman's creation is not tailored specifically for only queer people. Their comic, as well as the Netflix show, is very specifically designed that even completely cis-het people can watch it and enjoy it. It has great cinematography, the comic has great art, the acting is great in the show. There's all sorts of valid reasons for cis-het people to enjoy it. In contrast, I think the majority of people who seek out yaoi anime are either fetishizing it or are queer. To categorize one form of art over the other as better is a different thing to talk about, and Oseman doesn't even get into that. But genuinely, I do think that Heartstopper is a much better example of a healthy queer relationship than yaoi anime has presented me in any form that I've consumed it. I don't know how to end this video, but I appreciate you watching, and if I messed up on pronouns, I'm sorry. I tried really hard in this one. I've had a lot of thoughts on this, and I really did want to make it into a video, so yes, this is an excuse to talk about Oseman being the person of the year, so there you go.